There is a category of creatures in the world that have been cited by a few people, but have not been confirmed to exist. We collectively refer to these creatures as Unidentified Mysterious Animal, or UMA for short. Hello everyone, and welcome to the UMA series video. The White Nile is one of the two main tributaries of the Nile River in Africa. In a broad sense, it refers to all sections of the river flowing from Lake Victoria through Lake Kyoga to Lake Albert. The complex waterways and vast marsh wetlands have formed numerous wilderness areas rarely visited by humans. Local indigenous people say that a gigantic monster lives in this boundless expanse of water. It is larger and fiercer than the biggest python. And this is the subject of our discussion today: the water monster of White Nile folklore, the Lau. Lau refers to a gigantic water monster shaped like a snake or a catfish living in the vast Sudan swamps. I have not found a reasonable explanation for the origin of the name Lau. I only know that the local Dinka, Nuer, and Shilluk people all use this word to refer to this monster. In Sir R.H. Owen's Newer English Dictionary from 1929, the word Lu was used to label a gigantic and fearsome aquatic animal. Speaking of creatures that are now extinct, and maybe deified or mythical, the earliest written record we can find regarding this creature is from the 1923 edition of Sudan Notes and Records. It is an article titled Newer Terms for the Upper Nile Province, written by Henry Jackson, a government official of the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan at the time. At the end of the article, under the caption Reptiles, there is such a description. It is said there are two distinct kinds of python in the Nuer country. One lives in abandoned anthills and is large enough to swallow a dwarf ox or a large eland. The other is amphibious, measures between 12 and 20 feet in length, and can swallow a whole sheep or goat. I have also heard of a third legend, a great snake always held in awe by the Nuer, which may be a creature of their imagination. The Nuer and Dinka call this snake Lau, to distinguish it from another giant snake called Nyal by the Shilluk people. Its body is extremely huge and stout, exceeding 40 feet in length. Its overall color is light brown or deep yellow. Between its belly and tail is a rectifying protrusion about 3 inches long and 2 fingers wide. A rut can be seen left on the ground where it has traveled. There are 4 separate bones on each side of the lower jaw, about 4 inches long. Its actual skeletal structure is very similar to that of a python. Once people find these broken bones, they carefully treasure them for good luck. Its bones are regarded as a treasure to ward off the evil eye. Some say the Lau has a short crest on the back of its head, while others say it has long hair used to entangle prey and drag it into the river. Even though its belly rumbles like an elephant, some cases seem to suggest that people have genuinely seen this creature. For example, in 1914 in the Adar marshes, a complete giant snake skeleton was divided up by the Nuer. In the early 20th century, a 40-foot-long individual was discovered in the town of Wau in the west. It was killed by the local indigenous people, and later some people offered a human sacrifice to it. It is not uncommon in the marshes of the Bahr al-Arab and can also be found in the Bahr el-Ghazal River. The Lau is endowed with various magical properties. The Nuer say that the Lau's gaze symbolizes death. If it sees a human first, those people will be killed. Conversely, if a person sees the Lau first, they can be safe. This snake mostly inhabits caves on the banks of rivers or swamps. People fear it deeply. As soon as they see a rut on the ground indicating its presence, they flee in the opposite direction as fast as possible. Stories about this creature are widespread in remote places like the Bahr el-Arab, Adar marshes, and Bahr el-Ghazal River. The descriptions of the Lau's color, lower jaw, and body size are surprisingly consistent in all records. In 1924, the British writer John Millay, in his book Far Away Up the Nile, mentioned that he specifically went to Malakal to interview a police officer named Mr. Stevens. The latter was an experienced old hunter and was responsible for managing a large section of the telegraph line on the east bank of the Nile. Therefore, he frequently interacted with the local indigenous people. The article is directly based on Stevens' oral account. Overall, Stevens' description of the Lau was not significantly different from Jackson's, except that the size of the creature was exaggerated up to 100 feet. He also mentioned that it was as thick as a horse and had huge tentacles or a thick, stiff hair on its tongue used to grab prey. Furthermore, this animal was very rare. A company employee named Yabala Mohammed saw a Lau that had been killed in a village called Boga. Here, Stevens also mentioned the individual killed by the Shilluk in the Adar marshes and stated that he was lucky enough to obtain some of the creature's jaws and hand them over to Jackson. The latter sent them to the British Museum for identification, but no satisfactory explanation was obtained. An Azalande man named Rabba Limbi in Wau also claimed to have seen a similar monster killed in the nearby swamps. Additionally, Stevens met a Belgian administrative officer in Rajaf on the west bank of the White Nile. He was very certain of the Lau's existence, as he had seen one of these giant snakes in the swamp and shot at it several times, but the bullets had no effect. The monster left a huge track in the swamp as it entered deeper water.
In 1937, the British colonial administrator William Hitchens, in his article African Mystery Beasts, stated that the Lau and the Lukwata are very likely the same animal. They are very similar in characteristics such as being aquatic, their nocturnal calls, and the magical attributes associated with their remains. You can refer to my earlier videos for content about the Lukwata. At the same time, Hitchens also provided a photograph of a wooden carving of the Lau's head. The owner of the sculpture was an artist named Mugunda from the Aramba district of Singida province, Tanzania. However, I personally am not discerning enough to tell how this photograph reflects the shape of the Lau's head. In 1939, the British writer Frank Lane, in his book Nature Parade, mentioned that Hitchens had sent him a letter which included this photograph, and mentioned that Mugunda, when he was young, had traveled and hunted in the Victoria Swamp and Nile wetlands. When Hitchens suggested that the Lau did not exist, he retorted, "When I was young and ignorant, I might have said that your car does not exist at all, because I had neither seen nor heard of such a thing at the time. But now, the car is parked right in front of me, and I have even ridden in it and listened to the engine running. This is the same as the legend of the Lau."
In 1955, the cryptozoologist Bernard Heuvelmans, in his book On the Track of Unknown Animals, detailed the relevant information about the Lau. As the article circulated, he also received feedback from more informed individuals. In 1959, the well-known Sudanese administrative officer Thomas Owen wrote a letter to Heuvelmans, reporting a similar experience, and recorded this description in 1960 in his book Hunting Big Game with Gun and Camera. In the 6th chapter of the book, he mentioned that among the numerous legends related to water-dwelling creatures, the Lau consistently lacked a first-hand witness, at least no surviving eyewitness. It has been attributed with various identities. It might be a thunder lizard, a crocodile, a giant mysterious water buffalo, a strangely shaped mamba snake, or a product of hallucination and superstition. The Dinka people fear an animal called Joke Anyonyi. This creature only inhabits certain specific water bodies, and the distribution areas are far apart. Although people do not exclude activity in these waters, they always avoid those places. The Joke Anyonyi is about 3 miles long, and its tentacles are as long as 1/4 mile. It can prey on swimming objects and also attack canoes and seize humans. But it is more accustomed to secreting its prey, sucking the blood dry, and then allowing the corpse to float on the water surface or be washed ashore. The most frequent haunt of this creature is a section of the Bahr al-Arab River. This river separates the Ghazal River from Kordofan to the north. On a muggy day in early March, Owen and British officers from both provinces, Dinka chiefs, Arab elders, and dozens of tribal members were camping under the trees on the north bank. They saw a flock of green-winged teal swimming across the water, so his colleague Bob shot one. The duck fluttered 6 or 7 times and then sank in the middle of the stream. Bob took off his clothes and jumped into the water, intending to swim over and retrieve it. After swimming a short distance, Owen noticed he suddenly looked anxious and stopped. Then he shouted, "There's something over there." A moment later he exclaimed, "Oh God, I need to get out of here," and then submerged. Owen had to jump into the water fully clothed to help. He swam back to the bank while the Dinka teenager who had been with them had already fled. Half an hour later, the chief arrived and marveled at their luck and stated that 3 days ago, that thing had seized one of their soldiers. At this time, the carcass of a bull that people had slaughtered to appease the water monster was still placed on the opposite bank.
According to Owen, these legendary records, which lack scientific basis and are often vague, are usually one-sided and exaggerated in the process of oral transmission. It's interesting, but these perceptions are based on experience. Africans rarely invent completely fictitious creatures based on imagination. The Dinka people have a very thorough understanding of crocodiles and would never confuse them with other creatures. As for the legend, he remains open-minded and is always ready to consider future evidence that might emerge regarding the Lau's existence. Cryptozoologist Bernard Heuvelmans supports William Hitchens' view, believing that the Lau should belong to the same category of animal as the Lukwata. This is because most East African lakes are connected to the swamps at the source of the Nile via the White Nile. The remains of both animals are used to make amulets with the same magical properties. Their notorious reputation also seems to have extended to the closest parts of the Belgian Congo. He believes that compared to giant pythons, the Lau and Lukwata should be identified as a type of giant catfish, because all the descriptions of the Lau appear contradictory when applied to a single species. The tribal common name Lau, as originally mentioned by Jackson, might actually be inaccurate. Like the Nile mentioned by the Shilluk people above, or the Joka Nyoni feared by the Dinka in Owen's writings, these differences may indicate that Lau is actually a general term for a class of animals, such as unknown large aquatic animals, and most sighting reports can be explained by fish. Heuvelmans leans toward the idea that the Lau is a type of large catfish. The largest known catfish species in southern Africa currently is the Vundu catfish, Heterobranchus longifilis. The largest individual found has a body length of 1.5 meters and a weight of 55 kilograms. In fact, looking at this image, the 4 pairs of prominent barbels, or whisker-like structures, can indeed make one imagine the described feature of long hair. Another candidate is the Nile perch, Elates niloticus, an ancient fish species native to Africa. Their tracks are found all over Africa, from the Nile River to the Congo Basin and to West African countries like Senegal. They're generally gray, characterized by a row of neatly arranged dorsal fins and diamond-shaped hard scales to protect themselves from predators. The largest, though unconfirmed individual, has a body length of 1.2 meters, and Professor Heuvelmans believes that the protrusion on the back of the Nile perch might be mistaken by people for the Lau's head crest. The African sharp-toothed catfish, or Egyptian Clarius gariopenus, in order to move on land during drought, possesses accessory respiratory organs that can directly inhale air. Its air sac can produce an audible rumbling sound. This could explain the phenomenon of the Lau's vocalization. And the terrifying description in the legend that being seen by the deified Lau leads to death might stem from the electric current released by the electric catfish, Malopterus electricus. Although it does not pose a direct threat to human life, it is enough to cause shock and panic. In addition, the marbled lungfish, Protopterus ethiopicus, might also be the source of this confusion, because they burrow into the swamp mud during hibernation. When startled, they show clear aggressiveness. However, clearly no single fish can completely explain the description of the Lau's features, and the known maximum size of these catfish cannot compare with the legendary water monster. But the professor believes that considering the size development of catfish in Eurasia and the Americas, a yet-to-be-discovered giant catfish species is very likely to exist in the African swamps.
Overall, I personally believe that the Lau is highly likely to have originated from people's misunderstanding. Based on the known information, the core contradiction lies in the numerous and highly consistent folk legends versus the almost complete absence of indistinguishable physical evidence. Furthermore, the Lau and Lukwata still have relatively large differences in the description of their specific physical features. Or, it is more like some kind of large aquatic or amphibious reptile. Based purely on the description of the Lau itself, I can only think of the South African rock python, Python natalensis, because according to explorers' records, local people distinguish this thing from common pythons but describe it as an even larger snake. Considering that the size limits of some reptiles have been constantly being broken in recent years, plus the refraction and visual errors when observing a creature underwater or partially submerged, it is not easy to discern the actual size of the target. Moreover, snakes are regarded as supernatural beings in most parts of Africa. For instance, the Luo people around Lake Victoria fear snakes, believing them to be a symbol of evil. In Njamba, Nigeria, snakes are regarded as divine wealth, and anyone who harms them is subject to punishment, even execution. Well, the truth about the Lau remains an unsolved mystery to this day. Whether it is a truly existing animal or a product of the collision between colonial and indigenous cultures, at least its story adds a layer of lingering mystery to that boundless swamp, and gives later generations a reason to pursue this UMA. Finally, the same saying applies. The unknown is always greater than the known. This is the charm of UMA. This video ends here. Thanks for watching.